Starting from May 20th and up to 8 a.m. today, May 23rd, the Ukrainian side launched a record number of combat drones, 788 drones, at civilian targets and peaceful citizens of the Russian Federation. We repelled all these attacks, although, unfortunately, there are dead and wounded. We issued a special statement by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on this matter. It is widely distributed among states and in international organizations. We believe that such behavior is a direct consequence of the support of the Kiev regime by the Nazis, primarily by some European countries, led by Britain, France, Germany, and the leadership of the European Union. We are convinced that they bear their share of responsibility for these crimes. We will firmly seek to put an end to this policy. There is an obvious attempt to disrupt the peace talks and undermine the process. That was started in Istanbul following the agreement between President Putin and President Trump, which envisaged, first of all, 1,000 for 1,000 prisoner exchange, and continued work on documents that would formulate specific conditions, specific demands, the fulfillment of which is necessary for the conclusion of peace agreements. We will continue this work, regardless of any provocations.
Sergey Viktorovich, will Russia continue to strive for a peaceful settlement?
We remain committed to a peaceful settlement. We are always open to negotiations. President Putin has repeatedly confirmed this, publicly and in his negotiations with foreign figures. But I would like to draw your attention to the fact that all the goodwill gestures that we have undertaken, including the ceasefire on the occasion of Orthodox Easter, the ceasefire on the occasion of Victory Day, as well as the ceasefire in the form of a moratorium, a month-long moratorium on attacks on energy infrastructure, which was announced after the conversation between Presidents Putin and Trump. We observed all these ceasefires, and all of them were disrupted by Ukraine, which continued its aggressive and criminal actions during the pauses and hostilities that we announced. I would like to emphasize once again that we remain committed to the agreements that were recently reached in Istanbul between the delegations of Russia and Ukraine. We are completing our preparatory work on drawing up a list for the exchange of prisoners of war on a 1,000 for 1,000 basis. And we are actively working on the second part of the agreements, which provides for the preparation by each of the parties of a draft document setting out the conditions for achieving a sustainable, long-term, comprehensive agreement on the settlement. And now, as soon as the exchange of prisoners of war is completed, we will be ready by that time to hand over to the Ukrainian side a draft of such a document, the preparation of which the Russian side is currently completing.
You stated that international organizations will be informed about the statement of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. What reaction do you expect from them?
Well, I proceed from the fact that the reaction should be based on those fundamental documents that underlie the activities of the United Nations, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and other multilateral structures, and which require the unconditional exclusion of any attacks on civilian objects during military operations. This is also required by numerous conventions defining the principles of international humanitarian law. All these years they have been violated by the Kiev regime, which violates the rules of warfare generally accepted throughout the world, which ignores and generally questions its ability to be a responsible member of the world community. But, first of all, we expect a reaction from the UN, especially since the comments that we hear during the special military operation from the lips of the Secretary General and his official representatives show an unwillingness or inability to be guided by their direct responsibilities. First of all, to be guided by compliance with the principles of the UN Charter.
In recent weeks, a whole landing party of leaders of the European Union countries and European bureaucrats has landed in Kiev. These are Macron, Starmer, Merz, Kaja Kallas, and others. After that, as if on command, the terrorist attacks of the Kiev regime literally increased many times over. Do you see this direct connection? Are Zelensky's curators responsible for the murder of civilians?
I think that it is impossible not to see this direct connection. Yes, actually, those who patronize the Kiev regime, including the characters you mentioned, they do not hide this. It is no coincidence that they are hysterically trying to oppose our line on settlement by eliminating the root causes of the conflict with their idea of declaring an immediate ceasefire without any preconditions. In particular, they mean that such a formulation allows the Kiev regime to continue to be pumped with weapons. And from their public statements it is clear that this is the position that they do not want to abandon. And thus they are fueling the conflict. They are fueling Zelensky and his team so that they continue their criminal actions. So, there is certainly a responsibility for Europe here. And I think that when we consider the consequences of this conflict, I hope that this will be after the settlement. It will be very difficult to escape responsibility.
Sergey Viktorovich, do you think that the Western European leaders you have already mentioned are simply trying to undermine the efforts of U.S. President Donald Trump to peacefully mediate the crisis in Ukraine? Maybe they envy him?
I don't think we can talk about envy here. They simply got used to living with the previous U.S. administration, which led anti-Russian actions and which encouraged European capitals to do so in every possible way. But now that the administration has changed in Washington, it has become obvious that it was simply convenient for them under the Biden administration. But what they wanted was for the entire Western community to maintain unity in the fight against the Russian Federation, as they declared, with the goal of inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia on the battlefield. And if we now analyze their statements and other information about the line being pursued by London, Paris, Berlin, Brussels, the capitals of the Baltic states, Warsaw, it will become obvious that they cannot abandon this declared goal. They have staked their entire reputation on dragging Europe into a war against Russia in order to carry out the militarization of Europe under this guise. As you know, huge funds are being allocated for this by 2030. Chancellor Merz has declared that his goal is to make Germany again the main and most powerful military power in Europe, possessing the largest conventional army. These are very alarming signals. And I think that this brings to mind historical precedents. And this creates a very, very alarming picture. But there is another explanation for these actions of theirs. Of course, they have not lost hope of using certain circles in the United States to return President Trump and his administration to their anti-Russian camp, and thus share responsibility with the United States. They love to shirk responsibility, but I am sure that this time they will not succeed. starting from May 20th and up to 8 a.m. today. May 23rd. The Ukrainian side launched a record number of combat drones, 788 drones, at civilian targets and peaceful citizens of the Russian Federation. We repelled all these attacks, although, unfortunately, there are dead and wounded. We issued a special statement by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on this matter. It is widely distributed among states and in international organizations. We believe that such behavior is a direct consequence of the support of the Kiev regime by the Nazis, primarily by some European countries, led by Britain, France, Germany, and the leadership of the European Union. We are convinced that they bear their share of responsibility for these crimes. We will firmly seek to put an end to this policy. There is an obvious attempt to disrupt the peace talks and undermine the process that was started in Istanbul following the agreement between President Putin and President Trump, which envisaged, first of all, 1,000 for 1,000 prisoner exchange, and continued work on documents that would formulate specific conditions, specific demands, the fulfillment of which is necessary for the conclusion of peace agreements. We will continue this work, regardless of any provocation.